In this video, we're going to take our level 2 fighter and continue to level them up past level 3. Level 3 is when you typically apply your martial archetype. At least in the case of the fighter, that's when you apply it. And as a result, things are going to change as we continue to level through it. You will continue to receive the features that are acquired through your fighter class, but at the same time, you will start to receive features that are supplied by the champion class specialization. If you look on the fighter class sheet here, just above the martial archetypes, which is down at the bottom of the page, you will see features. These are the class features that you will receive as you level that particular character up, 3 of which we have already applied. First one being fighting style. If you recall, we selected the great weapon fighting. Second wind, which we acquired at first level, and action surge, which we acquired at second level. And if you're unsure as to when you're going to acquire a particular feature, if you click on the little icon here, it will pop open a description of what that particular feature is, and it will also tell you what level you're going to acquire that feature at. So the martial archetype here is going to be applied at level 3, and that's where we get to choose between, in the case of the generic fighter, if you only have the player's handbook available to you, the champion class, the battlemaster class specialization, and the eldritch knight specialization. In this video, we are going to be going through the champion class. Clicking on this little icon here, you will be able to open up the champion description. And it tells you a bit about this particular archetype, as well as what features you will receive as part of that particular archetype. Another location to look is going to be on the actual fighter class sheet. You'll see a summary table here that displays all of the levels from 1 through to level 20, your proficiency bonus gains, as well as the features that you will actually receive as you level through that particular character. We've already received fighting style and second wind at level 1. When we applied level 2, we got action surge. And when we apply level 3, we will acquire our martial archetype in addition to our first martial archetype feature, which is improved critical. And this is key because we're going to want to set up our attack roll to crit off of a 19 or a 20 as opposed to just a 20 in case of the improved critical for the champion. Finally, as we continue to progress through the levels, we'll see that we start getting our ability score improvements, and then we acquire our next feature from the base class, which is the extra attack. That is acquired at level 5. And we continue to receive those throughout the rest of the levels, and they will alternate between class features specialization features as well as class features. And you can pick up on that when you see this martial archetype feature. That's when you will apply the next class specialization. When you see a normal feature name like this, that means it's coming directly from the base class. And that would apply for all of the classes, but because this video is specific to the fighter, I'll make sure I try to reiterate that in the other ones as well. Later on, once you hit level 11, you now start looking at getting your extra attacks or some of your already existing features gain more extra attacks. So when you get this for a fighter class, in case you weren't aware, at 5th level, you can now attack twice per attack action. When you get level 11, you get an additional extra attack, which means you can now attack 3 times for an attack action. And then when you hit level 20, you get your 3rd extra attack, and that gives you a total of 4 attacks per attack action. Level 20 is really good. So let us begin actually applying our next level to our character. And you can do that by once again clicking on the little eye there and dragging it over and dropping it on top of this bar. It doesn't have to be right on top of the words for Fighter 2 or Fighter 1, but it does have to be dropped onto that same category. And as you can see here, this is when we get our pop-up. Now, I have extra supplements that are providing more class specializations that are other than the champion. But all we want to do in this case is select the champion class. but it will always give you a summary of all of the available archetypes that you can choose from. Once you choose this, I'm going to preempt this by setting the abilities tab open here. Once you select the champion and click this little checkbox here, and again, those are both with the left mouse button, you will see that we now have a new feature, and that is the champion class. But you'll also notice this has not changed. And the reason for that is you are still technically a fighter. You just happen to have a class specialization called a champion. So when you continue to level your character up through all of the various levels, you do not drag and drop the champion class like I did with fighter. So you do not grab this and drop it on top of that. It will not work the way that you expect it to. At least at the time of the recording of this video. I do not know if they will ever allow that, but generally it will be you choose your base class as your actual leveling class and continue to apply that. And you can always confirm that by, once again, clicking on the magnifying glass that is next to your class name and level, and then loading up the information sheet, which, again, I already have it open, by clicking on this little icon. That is what you need to be applying when you drag and drop it on top of this particular title. All right, it does not open this sheet. To get to this sheet, you go to your ability page. So if I close this now, and then I click on the eye here, you'll see that I get the information sheet for the champion. On top of that, we acquired our first archetype skill, and that's the improved critical. And this is going to require us to make some adjustments. In order to ensure that your character is able to crit on a 19 or higher, what you do is you actually make your adjustment through this magnifying glass that is on the weapons category. When you pop that open, you will get a weapon meta table. All right. And in this case, there does not appear to be a restriction on whether your attacks are specific to melee attacks or ranged attacks. So in both of our cases, all we do is change this number to 19. There are no additional extra crit die, at this point anyway. But what this does is this sets things up so that when your character rolls a 19 or higher during your attack rolls, so that would be when you're rolling the die 20 or when you're clicking on these icons here, your character will that will trigger an actual critical attack. So if I put this character into a combat situation, and let me just quickly open up a creature here. So NPCs, and I'm doing this on the DM screen because I do have this attached to a DM screen at the moment. So I'm going to throw that there. I'm going to throw, oh, I have to apply a token to be able to do this properly. No, okay, we're good. So if I open up the combat tracker on the player side, there's currently nobody there. But if I make that particular NPC visible, there is now a creature that we can attack. All right. So holding down the control button and left clicking inside of the combat tracker will allow you to target a particular NPC that you want to actually go through and attack. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continuously roll an attack roll until I either trigger a 19 or higher, or until I trigger a 19 or higher. So I'm just going to simply use one-handed. Figures, I'd roll a 1 right off. And you'll see here that it's an automatic miss. I do not have the crit and fail tables, critical fail and critical hit tables enabled for this example, so it didn't do any additional rolls. All right, let's just keep going. Hopefully I get something soon. And then I'm actually double clicking on this particular value. I'm not sure why it's the case, but for some reason, weapon attacks require a double click. Anything down here that might be an action that triggers an attack of some kind, whether it's a spell or a racial specific feature or anything like that, for some reason it only requires one One click. And I'm not sure why that is. It seems a little bit of an inconsistency in the interface design. Now you'll notice here that this value actually, and this actually, we had a couple that exceed the 19 or 20, but there was no critical roll that was applied. And the reason is that it has to be a natural roll. Okay, so the die 20 itself has to be a 19. And I could potentially force a 19 or higher, but I want to do it naturally. All right, let's see. You know, this isn't... When I went through and run a die 20 as the DM in my campaigns, I always seem to be able to roll a 20 at will. I don't know why. But in this case, it doesn't seem to want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video until I actually get a natural 19 or higher. And then once I get that, I will show you. Okay, so I managed to finally get a roll. It actually wasn't that too far off. And you'll see here that I rolled a natural 19. And you'll note here as part of the description that it is a critical hit. Now, what that will mean is that when I roll damage, it will roll 2 of the dice as opposed to just 1, and then add a +4 to the summary. Okay? That reminds me, actually, I need to correct a statement that I had made during the setup of this die roll down in the bottom right corner. That is actually an incorrect statement. And I believe this is the fix for it. 2, limit 1 +4. I think that is actually the correct statement for that. Yeah. So what this means is that in the brackets, it's going to execute the roll, and whatever the result of that total run is going to be, let's see if I can trigger a 2 or lower. There we go. Okay, so I rolled a 2, but it triggered a reroll, and in this case I got a 3, so it did not trigger any additional rerolls. That is the total sum of the value of that die roll, plus the 4 gives us the 7. So that is actually a correction that I had to make, and I forgot to make that earlier in the video, so that doing these attack rolls just reminded me of that when I was applying the damage. But as I said earlier, applying the damage, where did we do that? Here's the critical hit. So it went through and rolled 2 d8s and then actually applied the total damage to that. So I got a 6 as part of our natural roll, an additional 2 points of damage for the critical damage, plus the 4. So that's 8 plus 4 gives us the 12 total. So as you can see, Fantasy Grounds automatically will execute that roll for you. And you don't have to worry about figuring it out, mathing it out, or anything like that. The only time that might apply is if you actually have to do this. You'll note here that this particular roll, the damage that I rolled here, did not apply to this particular creature. You actually have to drag, if I can get it, come on, there we go. You have to drag it over and apply it, or you drag this and drop that. It didn't work in this case. It did do the total, no it didn't. Dungeon Master has to do the drag and drop. Yeah. So now you can see that the creature is dying because it only had a few hit points left. I keep forgetting that the Dungeon Master actually has to drag that total damage over. So there's still a bit of work for the Dungeon Master in reference to executing this kind of roll when you're doing a versatile attack, if you recall that from the previous video. If you did not watch the previous video, I highly recommend that you do so, as it covers a lot of the basics for the fighter class itself. All right, with that in mind, let's continue on leveling through. Now, this next level is going to be quite important because this is when we get our first ability score improvement. So I'm going to set this up, drag the fighter class over onto this to force a level 4. But you'll notice nothing really happened automatically. And there is a reason for that. It's a decision you as a player has to actually make in conjunction with a decision from the DM. And the reason why I say that is you have 3 options, but not all of those options may be applicable to the game that you're playing because the DM may not allow it. Those options are that you get to choose one of your attributes, and that's your strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, and add that +2 to that particular ability. So you could take, in this case, the strength to 20, the dexterity to 15, the constitution to 15, to the intelligence to 15, the wisdom to 14, and the charisma to 12. If you do decide to choose the constitution and add your modifier to that, you do get the ability to modify your hit points by the new value. So at level 4, let's say if I add the +2 to here, I believe this takes us up to a +2 bonus for your constitution bonus. That means you can add 4 to the overall roll to this, because it's literally plus an additional 1 for each level that you'll get. And then from that point forward, everything would be normal. There is a restriction to that. According to the rules of D&D 5th edition, you cannot modify a attribute past 20. So you can bring it up to 20. You cannot go past that. The only way those attributes will be higher than 20 is if a magical item, artifact, or whatever pushes those values higher. And you will not be able to adjust them. But if by the time you hit level 4, you already have an item that is increasing a particular attribute to 20 or higher, but it is not a natural 20, meaning that your raw ability isn't already at 20, you do still get to use the +2 to that particular attribute. So let's say, for example, that for some reason I got extremely lucky and I got a weapon that brought my total strength up to 22, even though the base is only at 18, so it's a +4. All right, at +4 bonus. When I hit level 4, I can still add my +2 modifier or ability attribute in improvement to that strength to bring it up to level 20 and bring the total bonus value or total strength value up to 24, because it's a natural 20 that you cannot increase your level past or your ability past. Okay, it is not a magical level 20. Now, in this particular case, there is a second option. I can choose 2 of these attributes and increase them by 1. So I could bring my strength up to 19 and my dexterity up to 14, or any other combination of that. And those are probably going to be the 2 options that most DMs will allow you to have. And the reason why I say that is that the third option is where you can add a feature. And features, in some cases, are very overpowered. So, for instance, the features themselves come from your right menu option bar here, and they're under feats. And when you apply a feat, it will actually apply to this location. So I keep calling it feature. It's actually not a feature, it's a feat. I'm not sure why they chose such a confusing combination for that, but anyway. Feats are different from features in a way. So I could potentially have this particular character choose Lucky. And what Lucky does is it gives you as a character the ability to use 3 luck points throughout the course of the day, specifically between, I think it's a long rest, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, a long rest. Then, let's say you rolled an attack roll. And also let's say that as the DM, I'm hiding the fact that you hit or miss as part of this output. Like in this case, the default value allows you to see whether you hit or miss. you as the player aren't really going to, well, I suppose you could know, potentially. You know whether your weapon's going to hit, but you don't know whether your weapon's going to do damage, because if the armor deflected most of it, you felt connection, but you wouldn't necessarily have observed if it had gone through the armor without seeing blood. Or ichor or something. But lucky in this case, if I was hiding all of these stats, you as the player would have the ability to re-roll an attack roll that you felt wasn't quite right. So let's say I rolled, use this 13. All right, let's use that as our example. This 13, in some cases, could hit the creature that you're attacking. It could also miss the creature that you're attacking. The risk is you as the player don't necessarily need, or you don't necessarily know right off the get-go as to whether you hit or not. The DM's responsibility in this case, if they're hiding the fact that you attacked and did hit or miss or whatever, you weren't sure, their responsibility is to tell you. Your responsibility as the player is to make the decision before they tell you whether you want to reuse a luck point to actually hit or miss. Now, the reverse is also available to you. If an NPC attacks you, you will know whether they hit you based on your AC. You then get to choose at that point to use a luck point, and you as the player roll the attack roll. The DM then has to use the one that you decide to choose, and that's actually part of this description here. So in the case of you connecting with an NPC or you attacking an NPC, there's a level of risk involved in using luck. But at the same time, luck itself is still overpowered, because you as the player could completely negate a critical hit against you. So you can see how it can become quite powerful. This is why some DMs don't allow feats. This is a perfect example. It's not necessarily OP. It is a feat available to you as a 5th edition rule set, but most DMs use it as an optional feature as opposed to something that they want to make use of in that campaign. A lot of DMs still allow it. I personally still allow features, or feats in this case. Other ones, for example, alert, make you nigh impossible to surprise, except when you're sleeping. The keyword here is while you are conscious. So if you as a player are sleeping, you can still be surprised. If you are knocked unconscious, you as a player can still be surprised. If you were put to sleep by a spell, you as a player can be surprised. Those kinds of things. So, but at the same time, you get a +5 to your actual bonus initiative here. Which means you're almost guaranteed to go first, unless there's exceptional rolls on the opposite side, or some of your other players. So this is why some DMs restrict the use of using feats. In this particular case, to keep things simple, I'm just going to do an attribute increase. So I'm literally just going to take the strength and bring it up to a level 20. All right, so let's continue. Our next level is going to be level 5. All right. Now, in this ability, you gain an extra attack. And I forgot to mention, when you apply your martial archetype, it just applies that there. It just tells you that you gain a martial archetype and that you'll get additional ones at 7th, 10th, 15th, and 18th. But in relation to the extra attack, you as a fighter, and specifically as a champion in this case, now have the ability to make 2 attacks per attack roll. So when you're in a combat situation, you would execute your first attack. That would be a hit. Then you execute your second attack. That would be a hit. In some cases, you may even have a bonus attack. So I believe with there are some abilities or skills that allow you to have, if you're dual wielding, for example, like if you have a long sword in one and a short sword in another, you can use your bonus action to make an additional attack with your short sword if you hit with your long sword. Okay? But here's the thing. You only get that bonus once. So in this case, let's say I hit both times. Or let's say I hit here. I could then use my bonus attack at that point with the short sword and hit. This might be a miss. Regardless whether it's a hit or a miss, you cannot use that second attack again from your left hand or your right hand, depending on which hand you chose as your primary hand. So let's run through that scenario again. In this case, I hit with the longsword, and I made my second attack. Let's say I hit again. I still have the ability, even though I may have missed on this one, I still have the ability to use my short sword attack as my bonus action. But now I have no bonus actions left. Okay? That means I would not be able to use Action Surge to be able to trigger another attack. Now this next one is going to be a bit tricky. Just 1 second here. All right, so you as a fighter now have your ability to execute 2 attacks. In some cases, DMs will put a restriction on Action Surge. In some cases, they won't. It really comes up to the DM, mainly because of the wording that's within the Action Surge restriction here. Okay? So the extra attack specifically states you get 2 attacks when you make your attack action. Okay? By the rules of D&D, as I understand them, you have your movement action, you have an action, you have a bonus action, and possibly a reaction. Movement can be done before and after your attacks, but keep in mind, if you get in proximity of a particular creature and then you decide to back away, there can be a reactionary attack against you, unless that creature has already used a reactionary attack. The action can be anything. It can be an attack action. It can be an investigation roll. It can be a perception roll. It could be you doing something other than an actual attack. The bonus action is just that. It only applies to any skill that is tagged as a bonus. So in the case of Action Surge, this is a bonus action. In the case of Second Wind, this is a bonus action. So, where is it here? It actually does state that it's a bonus action, but it doesn't show it here for some reason somewhere. Yeah, you can only use this once in the same turn as well, when you get the higher levels of this. All right. You can only do 1 bonus action per turn, and what that means, or in this case, it's per round, I should say. So a turn, as I understand it, is a full 60 seconds. A round is 6 seconds within that turn. For some reason, that's used interchangeably, and I don't know why people do that, but that's the definition as I understand it from 5th edition itself. Within those 6 seconds, you have your movement, your attack, your bonus action, and a reaction. And if you're ever unsure with these particular rules, it's very clearly defined in the Player's Handbook. So you go to Library, go to D&D Player's Handbook, Reference Manual, expand that so that you can actually search for it. And I use reaction as a search term, and it gets you to the order of combat. And this is the full description of the actual order of that particular combat, and it clearly describes all of the restrictions that come into play. For instance, the last item that you can do is a reaction. You can react even if you've used a bonus action, even if you've not used an attack, but you cannot use a reaction if, as I understand it, you are using a ready action. So you're delaying your turn on a specific trigger that would technically be your action, but I don't believe you actually get the ability to execute a reaction at that point. But anyway, so a quick summary: you get your initiative roll, a surprise roll if there is, or a surprise attack if there is one. You get your initiative roll. You get to execute your turn, which is a movement and an action. It includes a bonus action and a reaction. And now there's one thing that is a free action, and that is the ability to speak. So you as a player character are allowed to say something while you're in combat. And most players will typically execute their attack action, execute their bonus actions, and then say that their character is going to say something specific. And that passes information around to the rest of the party. So let's say, for example, that a monk has used their special abilities to determine weaknesses of a particular creature. That player can then, can then scream out to the rest of the party, use fire if that particular creature is weak to fire, for example. Things like that. So a free action works, but I believe it was literally limited to a sentence is generally what you get. And that's covered in this other activity on your turn. Things like that. So I've taken a bit of a tangent, but I took a tangent because it was applicable to the situation in this particular case. So the reason why I brought that up is that during the use of an action surge, some DMs will not let you attack twice. And I want that to be clear. Other DMs will. And it all comes down to the wording that is being used here. The way I've read it and the way that I understand it is that action surge is giving you an actual action. It is you, the player, that is defining whether it is an attack action or something else. If you define it as an attack action, that in my mind allows you as the player to use your extra attack. But you do not get to execute the bonus with your left hand. And that's because you used a bonus to trigger your action surge. All right, so I just wanted to make sure that that was all clear. That should clarify to both DMs and players who aren't entirely certain how the extra attack process should work. And the way I understand it is it should be that if you are going to execute an attack action during your action surge bonus round, you do get the extra attack capability. So that means you could theoretically attack 4 times if you're level 20, which means you could theoretically attack a total of 8 times. Okay? And just before moving on to continuing to level, I just want to point out something else that you can use for reference to clarify a lot of that information. So if you search for the word ready and look for actions in combat, you will see all of the available actions that you can take advantage of during an actual action. And there's something that most players don't realize. Everyone has the dash ability. That means you can use your attack action to move a speed equal to the movement that you have. So let's say your character can move 30 feet. If you decide to dash, that means you can move a total of 60 feet. You also have the ability to disengage. That means that you can back away from a particular creature that is next to you as your actual action to disengage from that particular creature and not receive an attack of opportunity. You have the ability to dodge, which means you gain an advantage in the sense that any NPC or creature attacking you gains disadvantage when they try to hit you. You can help someone, which means you're going to give that particular player advantage on whatever it is that they are trying to do. They gain advantage on that. You can try to hide. So every character does have the ability to attempt to hide. It's not just restricted to rogues and other stealthy-like classes. I believe rangers as well in some cases. Everyone has the ability to hide in an attempt to do so. And this would be the rules that you would follow in relation to that. You can improvise an action. So I've had some players that have taken a completely tangent direction from an action that I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. So you can improvise something, and I will generally reward a player for a scenario like that, in the sense that I will give them an additional inspiration point, which is something I haven't really covered, but I'll try to remember to do a video on those. And you can ready an action. Ready an action is a bit tricky, and the reason why it's a bit tricky is you have to define the circumstances with which your action is going to trigger. And they give a very good example of that here. You can choose to search, or you can use an object. And that object could be a lever that happens to be on the ground, or some other item that you want to interact with during an actual combat round. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out before going any further. Finally, let's continue leveling. So there's one last thing that I want to point out, and it's specific to readying an actual action. And if you look at the very first paragraph in that description, what you're actually doing is setting up a series of triggers to allow you to react to a particular situation. So let's say, I'll use two examples, okay? So let's say you set up a trigger that states, if that particular creature comes into reach where I can attack that particular creature with my sword, I will attack. That is going to be your ready statement, okay? So let's say that creature does move into into range, and you do get the ability to attack. Your reaction then triggers. That your ready action then triggers. You make your attack, but if that creature then decides they're going to move away from move or step back out of your attack reach, you as a player do not get an attack of opportunity on that particular creature because you've used your reaction and it triggered on your reaction. Now there's a flip side here. Let's say that the creature you set that trigger wording on doesn't yet get the chance to move, but another creature, or NPC, excuse me, comes through and moves in and then out of your attack reach, meaning that they have moved out of your sphere of influence, giving you an attack of opportunity. If you as a player decide to take that, you void your ready action. Okay, so the circumstances that you have set up to trigger don't apply anymore because you've now used your reaction, and a player only gets one reaction per round. All right, so I just want that to be clear, and I just needed to clarify that because some players have tried to take advantage of that and tried to word their way around it. This is, by the definition of the 5th edition rules, you are setting up your reaction when you create a ready trigger. Now, we are currently level 5. At level 6, we're going to get our next ability score improvement. And I should also note that by this time our proficiency bonus is increased, and you can see that reflected here. What that does mean is that your actual proficient skills have gone up in their own bonuses as well. Okay? So, next level. Oops. Drop that in. I now have an additional 2 points or 2 1 points that I can actually apply somewhere. So what I'm going to do this time to show you the difference is choose 2 skills that I then raise by 1. Now, this didn't automatically apply. So if I take a 13 here, put it back, you'll note that this doesn't change. That's because you have to go through, sorry, when I make this change, not that one. You'll note that that didn't change. And that is because when you apply or adjust this manually, you need to actually adjust your own bonuses. Now, I may have actually, so that should be 13. 14, yeah, okay, so that's fine. I just wanted to be sure. But anyway, you'll see here that a bonus has gone up. Now, at level 6, that means that I can bring this up 6 more hit points. So that would bring it up to 52. Now, because I've increased my constitution and added the hit points, I will now gain additional hit points by that additional bonus point as I move forward. Now the dexterity, it went up, and you'll notice here that as I change, my initiative is changing. That means I'm now getting a +2 bonus to my initiative. But my AC isn't changing. That's because in 5th edition, your AC is now specific solely to the armor you are wearing, unless you are not wearing armor. You no longer get a bonus applied when you actually go through and get a better dexterity as a result. That no longer applies in 5th edition. I don't know when that was removed, but I do know that, like, I'm literally jumping from 2nd edition to 5th edition. I know in 2nd edition it used to apply. 5th edition it doesn't. All right, so that brings us to level 6. Level 7 is when we're going to get our next attribute, or champion feature, and that's Remarkable Athlete. So let's take a look at that once I apply the level. Okay, and you'll see there that I got an 8 for additional hit points. All right, so starting at level 7, you can use half your proficiency bonus. Okay. I do not see this being a actionable bonus in the sense that you would tie it to your action page here. But let's see what happens if I do decide to drag and drop this into here. Yeah, nothing really comes up as an option. Now, it's very similar to action search. So what a DM might want you to do, and there is no rest restriction here. So, yeah. So a DM might want you to still drag this onto the action tab. And again, we're going to set up the group there. So this would be a champion ability, not just a fighter. So there are now 2 categories here. And this is a way to differentiate your fighter features from your champion features. All right. Now, the reason why I've done this is because a DM might actually want you to state that you're going to use your Remarkable Athlete ability when you do a long jump. Okay? And they may go, okay, so I'm going to use the Remarkable ability, and all I'm doing is left-clicking on that button there. Now you're telling the DM that you're doing it, and then you get to execute the action based on this particular thing equal to your strength modifier. Okay, next level is going to be level 8. That is another ability score improvement. And again, I'm going to drag the fighter over and drop that into place. Now, this time I'm going to choose a feature. And the reason I'm doing that is to show the variety of things that'll happen here. And you'll see that our list here is growing. So I'm going to drop the alert action feature onto this. Okay. Now our initiative is +7. And that is because the alert skill adds a +5 bonus to our character initiative. And for those of you who are not aware, initiative comes into play when you are starting a combat round after a surprise round. So you roll initiative, and you'll see here that I'm getting a +7. So you always roll a d20. You can literally just click on here. There is an extension in the Classic Edition that adds that ability here. It puts it at the top between the name and the weapons category. I can't remember the name of the extension, but it's highly useful because generally, as a player, you're typically switching between the main tab and the actions tab during combat. Specifically, if you have to reroll initiative all the time, you're checking your hit points because they're not displayed here. Things like that. Unless it's appearing on the combat tracker. For those situations where you've been knocked unconscious and the DM doesn't allow automatic death saves, you're switching back to the main tab to execute your death save rolls, things like that. So you're constantly switching between the two of them. And that mod, or the extension rather, just simplifies things by adding that information there. Anyway, I believe it's called attributes in combat or something like that. All right, so to actually roll initiative, you just double click on that little die 20 in the corner. So anytime you see a die in the middle or a die in the corner here, you can execute it. These proficiency statements here, that ties directly to your saving throw proficiencies. So you'll note here that saving throws, strength, and constitution. You're gaining your proficiency bonus on those saving throws. That's what that means. All right, so let's continue leveling. Okay, so we're going to be going to level 9, which means we are going to get Indomitable. I've never actually seen that skill, so this is going to be new to both of us. So Indomitable. Okay, so this is something we should apply as an action. And the reason for that is because you have the ability to use this. Now this is a fighter capability, so I'm going to throw this under the fighter group. And you'll see that here we get to use this once. So beginning at 9th level, you can re-roll a saving throw that you fail. If you do so, you must use a new roll, or you must use the new roll, and you can't use this feature again until you finish a long rest. So that means that you get a once daily use, and that should stay as daily. Okay? And I will show you a particular situation here where we've used it. So let's set that back to actions. We're now done preparation. I've now used Indomitable, and let's say that I've had to use Action Surge. All right, I'm going to execute a short rest, and you'll note that only Action Surge has come back. In order to get the Indomitable, when you've set it up and configured it that way, you need to execute a long rest, which is what I've just done. So you can see the statements there, what I've allowed that in the DM screen, where I've taken a short rest and I've set up a long rest. All right. You do, however, get the ability to use that again later on. So now you get 2 uses before you run out. So when we hit level 13, I will show you how to update this to be able to make use of that particular feature. Okay. Next level. Oops. All right. Oh, crap. I hate when that happens. Let's see here. I might be a little bit screwed. There used to be, so let's close that. And okay, 1 second, I'll be right back. Okay, if you ever run into a situation where that happens, you can grab a window by the very edge and move him back out. So you're not totally lost. So as you can see, I can move it freely at this point. So I'm going to move this back here, get rid of that, stretch my window, oops, set things up so that I can see again. So we are now at level 9. We're going to get our next Martial Archetype at level 10, which should be our additional fighting style. Yes, so I was correct that the champion got the additional fighting style. So let's go back to the abilities page here, or main page rather. So I'm going to drop this into place. And again, because we already have the fighting style, it's going to throw us into another fighting style. And this just gives us this. But to get the listing of fighting styles, we have to go to the original one. All right. And in this case, I'm going to choose 2-weapon fighting. And again, you just throw that into place. So with 2-weapon fighting style, you essentially get the ability to add your damage bonus to any attack that you make. So if you weren't aware, when you're wielding 2 weapons, whether it's a long sword and a short sword, or whether it's 2 short swords, or whether it's a long sword and a dagger, hand axe, whatever, any combination where you're wielding two weapons, one in your left hand, one in your right hand. Your dominant weapon or your dominant hand is going to receive the attack bonus and damage bonus when you make an attack. When you apply two weapon fighting style, your offhand also gets the ability to apply the damage. Okay. So I just wanted that to be clear. Theoretically, you should have turned off the +5 bonus when making two-handed attack rolls prior to you choosing two-weapon fighting style if you didn't choose two-weapon fighting style off the get-go. All right. So that should be clear. Now, essentially what that means is that the DM would have to subtract 5 from any roll that you did. I do not believe there is an easy way to do this unless you do something like this. Put in a -5 there. Yeah. So if you put the -5 into place on the damage bonus, you'll see that the +5 has gone away. So you could do something like this prior to you actually getting the two weapon fighting style ability if you didn't already get it. And then you just modify your weapon to do the -5 damage, or to the bonus, and that subtracts your attack bonus. When you do take weapon fighting style, you simply remove that bonus and you get your damage bonus back. So that is how you can actually take care of setting up a non-proficient, if you will, in the sense of non-proficient for two-weapon fighting style fighter, where you're wielding two weapons. All right. I should have mentioned that earlier, but I totally forgot about that before we actually started working down the champion tree. So our next level is going to be level 11, and that's going to give us 2 extra attacks. And what that means is that you as a player now have the ability to do 3 attack actions. And in my campaigns, that means that if you use Action Surge, you get 3 additional attacks. But you don't get to attack with your offhand if you're wielding 2 weapons. So what that implies is that you have a choice of being able to execute up to 4 attacks, 3 using your extra attack, and if one of those extra attacks, or one of those primary attacks hits, you get to use your bonus attack with the short sword if you're dual wielding like we have here. Or, if you trigger Action Surge, you can make 6 primary weapon attacks. So that means that you could attack with your longsword 6 times in one combat round. Now our next level is going to be level 12, and this is where we once again gain an ability score improvement. And for brevity of this particular video, I am just going to take my Constitution and up that by 2. Now that has added another +1 bonus to our overall Constitution gain. What that means is that I now have the ability to add 12 more hit points to this particular character's total hit point damage, because it's +1 times 12 gives me 12 over top of the 100 that was there. And I've been running that one repeatedly just so that it's clear as to what's actually happening there. Our next level is going to be level 13, and this is where we gain the ability to use Indomitable 2 times before we actually execute a long rest. So as promised, how you deal with that, so we now have level 13, we've applied our hit points. When it comes to Indomitable, you now want to switch this back to Preparation and set that to 2. And then flip it back, and you'll see that you now have 2 pips here. So I can now use this twice before I need to execute a long rest. So if I go over here and execute a short rest, you'll see that none of that comes back. But if I execute a long rest, both pips come back for use of that particular feature. Level 14 gives us an additional, oops, dang it, did it again. Gives us the ability to use an additional attribute increase. And in this case, I'm going to add 2 to my dexterity, bringing that up to 16. Now our initiative has gone up to +8. So this character is becoming nigh unstoppable when it comes to early attacks. And you can see how very quickly, the higher level you go, the more powerful you can actually get. Level 15 gives us our next martial archetype, which I believe is superior critical. So that means at level 15, your attack weapons score a critical hit on a roll of 18 through to 20. So if you recall, our improved critical gave us the ability to roll a critical attack, or critical damage rather, when we rolled a 19 or higher. Now this ability gives us to trigger a critical roll when we roll an 18 or higher. So let's apply the level. We're now at level 15. Go to our actions page and modify this and drop these values down 1. We still don't get an extra critical hit die that gets rolled, but we do now have the ability to trigger critical much more frequently if we happen to roll 18s and 19s far more often than we roll 20s, which is probably going to be the case. At level 16, we gain an additional ability score improvement. So let's drag that into place. So this time I'm going to take a feat, and that's just to balance out the dual wielding capability here. So dual wielder. Now, if you look here, right now our AC is 16. I do not believe this +1 is going to apply because we are technically wielding 2 weapons. But let's have a look here. Okay, so if I go to abilities and I apply that, so I now have 2 features. You'll see that the AC has not modified. And I've selected this skill specifically for this purpose, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to use the champion for this particular, or the 2 weapons for the champion. What you have to do is modify your actual AC directly. So in this case, no, I don't need that. Set that back to that. I'm now doing with 1 extra weapon. So I'm adding the bonus to this particular armor class. It's not to any of these, it's to the armor class. And you'll see that our armor class has now come up 1 level. And what else? All right, so all of these skills are technically passive. One thing that is also not overly clear, even though you are dual wielding, if you don't have this dual wielder skill, you would not, or feat I should say, you would not be able to draw your longsword and your short sword in the same round. You would have to draw your longsword, make your attack with your longsword, and then the following round draw your short sword so that you now have 2 weapons. All right. With this particular skill, you can now draw both, as if you would normally do so. So that is level 16. Let's take a look at the next level. All right. So there are 2 things that are going to occur here with level 17, and that is that we are now going to get an increase on the number of uses for Indomitable and for Action Surge. But you'll see here that nothing is actually increased for either of those. So what we want to do, once again, go to Preparation. We want to increase Action Surge to 2 and increase Indomitable to 3. These do not change because those skills don't adjust. I don't believe anyway. So, long rest. Yeah, so Indomitable is always between a long rest and Action Surge is also a rest, so it doesn't have to be just a long rest. Okay. Now that that's done, you'll see that we now have 3 pips for Indomitable and 2 pips for Action Surge. All right, at level 18, we are going to get our last archetype feature, which is this. I actually haven't read this before, so bear with me a moment. Okay. This is going to be a user triggered ability. And as you can see here, there's a heal capability here, and it looks like it's already gone through and calculated what that is going to be. So much like Second Wind, where you can heal yourself, the champion also gets one called Survivor. So in this case, champion, I'm going to change the group so that it's now under the appropriate group, and I'm going to set it up. So if I execute this, you'll see that it will say that you're not wounded. I haven't taken any wounds, so can't do any healing. But what should happen? Okay, you do not need to worry about the fact that this isn't something you use and then lose as a rust, so you don't need to adjust it like we have with these. That means you can always use it as long as you're falling underneath that location. But this has to be used at the start of each of your turns. So there's a very specific condition for this, and it does not fall under an action, as I understand it. Okay, so that is level 18. Let's take a look at 19. At 19, we get our last ability score improvement. So that means we can either do a feat, an ability, or 2 ability modifiers. Now, in this case, I don't believe bringing this up to 17 changes the bonus, so no. So I'm going to set that back to 16. And this is a tough question, so I'm going to do a dexterity increase of +2 to make this character nigh unstoppable when it comes to his initiative rolls, or his or her initiative rolls. All right, that is level 19. Level 20, we get our last bonus, but there's no additional modifiers that we have to make. And I just want to reiterate, at level 20, you now have a total of 4 primary attacks, plus 1 bonus attack if you're dual wielding, or 4 primary attacks. After action surge, you get 4 more primary attacks. Okay? So I just want that to be clear, that you can theoretically attack for a total of 5 or 8 attacks in a single round, depending on if you use action surge or not. If you use action surge, you cannot use your offhand weapon in an attack. If you don't use action surge, you can use your offhand weapon in an attack. But in that case, you would only get 5 attacks. Whereas if you use action surge, you theoretically could get a total of 8 actual attacks. All right. That completes the champion leveling. There is no level past level 20, according to the rules of 5th edition at the time of this recording. We have now completed this particular class, and I hope you have found this particular video useful. If you want any additional items added to it, please let me know in the comments. If you feel that I didn't cover a particular area enough, or you have additional questions, don't hesitate to ask there as well. I'll go through and try to respond best I can. If you do like this video, feel free to click that like button. And if you do like what I'm doing and want to see more, don't hesitate to hit that subscribe.